Hi, my name is Shelley Senterfitt, and I am a lawyer, but I'm also in the clinical mental health counseling program at Georgia State, and was asked to talk a little bit about what the law says regarding the ability of pastors to engage in counseling. So the code section that is relevant is OCGA 43-10A-7, and this deals with the licensure for mental health professionals, including professional counselors. The first paragraph of that code section basically says that if you aren't licensed as a counselor, then you can't hold yourself out, excuse me, as a quote professional counselor or a social worker or a marriage and family therapist. We have specific requirements in order for a person to identify themselves professionally as a professional counselor or another licensed mental health professional. So the only way you can do that is if you jump through those hoops and you get your license. That's what the first part of that law says. But then it has an exception. Subparagraph B says, however, we're not going to apply that prohibition to certain categories of people. So if you, and then several of those relate to persons of faith, people who are pastors or otherwise engaged in a faith-based organization. So essentially what the second part of the statute says is that as long as you don't say that you are a professional counselor or social worker, then you can engage in counseling if that's something that is a part of your job. So of the sort of exceptions, I guess, to that statute, that includes active members of the clergy, but only when their practice of the counseling is in the course of their service as clergy. In other words, if a pastor has been called to a church and a part of her responsibilities at that church is to provide pastoral counseling, then she's allowed to do that so long as she doesn't represent herself as a professional counselor. She would hold herself out to be a pastoral counselor. So that's one exception. Then a second exception is members of religious ministries responsible to their established ecclesiastical authority who possess a master's degree or its equivalent in theological studies. So if you are a part of a ministry and you do have a master's degree, then that's another exception that would allow you to engage in counseling. And then the third exception for people of faith is persons engaged in the practice of a specialty in accordance with biblical doctrine in public or nonprofit agencies or entities or in private practice. So essentially, if you're engaged in counseling in the context of some faith-based organization, whether it be a private practice that was, say, a Christian counseling practice, or if you worked for a nonprofit agency, so long as you aren't holding yourself out as a professional counselor, you could engage in counseling as a part of that work. So what the law tries to do is to provide some flexibility for pastors and other folks working for religious organizations to engage in pastoral counseling, just not in the context as a professional counselor. Of course, if they happen to have a master's degree in counseling, as well as they were working in a religious setting, there'd be nothing stopping them from getting licensed as a professional counselor, and then they could say, yes, I am both a licensed professional counselor as well as a pastor who's engaged in pastoral counseling in this faith-based organization. So it's not to suggest that a clergy person who also has a master's in counseling couldn't continue to get licensed, but in the event that they haven't gotten licensed, then the limitation is just essentially how they represent themselves to the public. So I hope that information is helpful.